when it comes to planning your podcast before you even open Audacity, which is your open source free editing software that is available for Mac, Linux, or Windows. We'll talk about, approaching the podcast project itself. So I've already posted a link to our presentation here, but I'll go ahead and add it once more for our newcomers. Feel free to follow along. There's also some hyperlinks that you can click on to see, what we'll be talking about, where we'll be going in the wide world of the internet. So I've created a planning document that I typically use for video projects, but I would say it is just as useful for planning out really any kind of media content. And that is this template script / planning document. So with this, you'll be able to consider, what is the purpose of your project, your topic, consider your audience. Now, this can be something that's very detailed, very focused, but I would say with something like a podcast, chances are you might be considering something that might be a bit more personal, or you just want to, find a way to get your voice out there. So it's entirely okay to consider that maybe it's just something you want to talk about. I'm going to show you the notes that I used to produce a sample podcast that we'll be looking at soon. It could be something as simple as this. That's all I wrote up before putting together my recording studio and just talking straight through for 15 minutes and then bringing that into Audacity. Starting off with a plan, I showed you a potential planning document to get started. We've got the notes that I've used for the sample podcast we'll be talking about. Now, I want to show you my recording studio. So my goal with this series is to show you that you can use exactly what you have available to you. Now, while I am using a dedicated USB microphone for my presentation today, the sample podcast that I'll be showing you was recorded like this. It's sitting on a yoga block. That's my mobile phone, and it's in my closet. So basically what this allows me to do is it allows me to record vocals in such a way where we won't have a lot of what's called reverb. My voice isn't bouncing around, and you'll hear the result of what that sounds like very soon. So just want to say, you don't need a whole bunch of fancy equipment to get started. Alrighty. And let's see here. So, of course, the place to start off is downloading and installing Audacity. I also do want to throw out there that if you have any questions along the way, or if you want me to slow down or explain anything I might be doing, feel free to sound off in chat. I'll be watching that and periodically making sure that I check in there. So, go ahead and make your way over to audacityteam.org, and remembering that Audacity is free. It is open source software, and you'll find the download link right here. And select your favorite operating system, that being hopefully the one that you're using there. Today we're going to be using Windows, but it will be very similar, if not almost identical, if you're using Mac. I'm less familiar with the Linux version, but we'll operate on the assumption that it's going to be very similar there too. Now, when you click on the download link, you'll be given some instructions as well as a couple of options on where you can download that link. The one thing that I've also reflected in my presentation here, which does have links for you to use, is that down here, I'll go ahead and full screen this guy. I've included a link to a plugin called FFmpeg, along with the instructions on how to download that. I won't go into detail here, but basically what this plugin does, and once you download it and install it, you don't have to worry about it anymore. It allows you to both import and export a few different types of audio files. It'll be very useful. We don't have to get too technical, but I would recommend that you include that along with your setup here. So once you've installed Audacity, if you don't feel like recording yourself right off the bat, Also within this presentation, I've included a OneDrive download link that should work for you even if you're not signed in through FSU. And it has some sample project files, some raw audio, and some free to use music that you can edit with if you want to start experimenting with that. And of course, I include the link to the official documentation for Audacity. But as far as what we're going to be covering today, we've already covered podcast planning. We're going to open up Audacity and look at our initial setup. We're going to go over the interface. We're going to import audio files as well as record vocal audio. We're going to be editing those audio clips together. And ultimately, we're going to export your audio project. So with that, let me go ahead and get a bit organized here. Before I even get started with opening Audacity, in addition to our podcast planning, I like to create a project file, and that allows me to go ahead and organize everything that I plan on collecting. So one being anything that I happen to pre-record ahead of time. So if you're bringing in files that were recorded elsewhere, you're not recording in Audacity, I have a folder just for that. I've created one for any music that I plan on using during my podcast. We also have my exports. So anytime I finish a draft, it's going to go in that folder. And we have our Audacity project file. So that's where we'll be saving our sample project for today. Now, let's finally get it open and get started. So this is Audacity. Welcome. And let's take a look at the interface here real quick. So right off the bat, this is your playback palette. You probably recognize a lot of these, but this is your pause button, play, stop. And these two buttons here allow you to skip either to the very beginning or the very end of everything you've recorded in a particular project. And of course, we have our button of ultimate power here, record. So what I'm going to go ahead and do anytime I start off a project is I'm going to make sure that the correct devices are selected. Starting off with my microphone. So I know that the microphone I'm using today is called the Yeti microphone. If you plan on recording, say, through your a dedicated headset, make sure that you find that under here. Same goes for, say you're using your webcam microphone, that's also an option. And if for any reason those devices don't show up, maybe you plugged it in after you opened Audacity, go ahead and close it, reopen it, and it should appear in the dropdown. Now over here, you have the option to choose whether or not you're recording in mono or stereo. For our purposes today, since we're recording a podcast and we're not necessarily interested in having our voice only appear in the left or right channels, unless you want to create that effect for any reason, we're going to be recording in mono. So that means it'll be evenly distributed across the left and right channel. And of course, we have our speakers. So this is going to be where you're listening back to anything you've recorded. Now this says Yeti stereo microphone. That's because my particular microphone has a headset jack in it. So that's what I'm using. But this could be your headset labeled here or your computer speakers. So if you run into any issues where you can't record or you can't listen, start off with these drop downs here. So let's go ahead and record our first vocal sample and see what happens. I'm just going to hit the big red button. This is a sample of me talking so that we can look at what our vocals sound like. As you can see, it's represented here via what's called a waveform. Let's take a look at that waveform. So this is what your project is going to look like, especially as you start to add more audio tracks, and it is represented by this waveform. Now what we're looking at here, vertically speaking, this is going to be the amplitude, or as we experience it, the volume of your recorded sound. At these stages here, 1 and -1, that is the most extreme, loudest volume that you can get to. You necessarily don't want to be too close to there, because when your audio gets to that point, it's going to start clipping, which is going to be distorted and is generally not going to be a very comfortable listening experience for you or your audience. Let's go ahead and listen back and see what my voice sounds like. So what I'm doing here is I've used this button to go back to the beginning of my recording, and I'm going to hit spacebar anytime I'm playing back our audio. This is a sample of me talking so that we can look at what our vocals sound like. A couple of things you may notice. When we're listening back to our vocals, it's going to appear here in our playback level. So that gives us an idea of generally, where the amplitude or volume of our voice is going to be hanging out. Now, if it ever does clip, you should be able to see it in the waveform, but you'll also see it here. I'm not going to subject you to sounds that are that loud, but you'll see little red squares appear here, and they'll stick around after you've listened to your vocals. So as you can see here instead, I've got these lovely blue rectangles that have shown me where my voice peaked, that's the loudest your vocals will ever sound as of your last preview. Okay. So let's look at our tool palette. So these set of tools right here are what we're going to be using to edit and manipulate our audio moving forward. So there is our selection tool that allows us, if I were just to click anywhere, to go to that part of the recording. So if I just want to listen to this section, click there, press spacebar. What our vocals sound like. Same goes for my ability to click and hold down. That allows me to select a portion of the audio. Now, I know that I don't necessarily want, say, these long periods of silence at the end. As soon as I'm done talking, I want to go ahead and delete that audio. So what I'm going to do, click, drag, and now that I'm sure that I don't want that audio, I'm hitting delete on my keyboard. It's gone. Same goes for any pauses here. So that's how you can go ahead and delete portions of your audio. Now, there is also the ability to bring in audio from outside. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to show you how to import extra audio. So whether this is something that you've recorded before, or maybe it's your theme music, you can go to File, Import, Audio, or since I have my handy dandy organized project files here, I'll go over to my music, and I can drag and drop it directly into Audacity. Now what it's done here is it's automatically zoomed out to show me the entire length of this music piece, whereas you can see my original vocal recording is here. Throughout your project, you might be interested in seeing certain parts of your audio in greater detail. And in order to do so, we've got our zoom in and zoom out buttons right here. So we'll go ahead and click that. And where it's going to zoom in is based off of where my selection tool is going to be. So if I were to click here, when I zoom in, it's going to focus on that part of the recording. I want to focus on my vocals at the moment. So I'll go ahead and zoom in there. Now, what I'm going to do, I just recorded a very basic sample, but let's say that I'm going to record based off of the podcast notes that I showed off earlier. So I'll go ahead and grab those real quick and bring them over. So I've got my show notes for my podcast. Now, something I love to do is creating little templates for myself. So ideally, if you're going to be creating an episode, or say 10 episodes in a series, if there's something that you say over and again, ideally just record it once, and then you never have to, go back and do that work every single time you do your project. So let's look at the introduction that I've made for my podcast. In this case, it's called Brain Vacancy, Rent-Free, show about whatever's distracting me this week. And we're going to just create our introduction. So I'll go ahead and let's say, I'm not interested in keeping, this particular audio sample. So what I can do is come up here to the upper left of my track, hit X, and it's gone. And I'm going to go ahead and start recording a new track. Oof, okay, a couple things that happened there. One being when I hit record, it's going to create a new track to record to. That's okay. But it's also playing back other audio tracks. So if you've got, other spoken words, other music tracks, it's going to be playing that back while you're recording. So how do we rectify this? And also you might notice as well that it started recording wherever my selection tool was last clicked. So something I like to do here, we'll hit our skip to start button to make sure that we're at the beginning. And what I'm going to do, there's a mute button here. So now when I start my next recording, I'll get my new track. We won't have to worry about listening to my, 80s, 90s sitcom introduction music that I'll be subjecting you to enough very soon. So based off of my script here, I'll go ahead and resize Audacity. So if you're working off a script, you can make good use of the real estate on any given screen. And I'll be recording this line here. Hey, I'm Tom, and this is Brain Vacancy Rent-Free, the show about whatever's distracting me this week. Now, anytime I do this, I like to go ahead and get a couple of takes. If it's pre-recorded, then give yourself options. Hey, I'm Tom, and this is Brain Vacancy Rent-Free, the show about whatever's distracting me this week. Hey, I'm Tom, and this is Brain Vacancy Rent-Free, the show about whatever's distracting me this week. Fun tip about your recording is that if you're going for a particular tone, something that I like to do, especially if I'm doing voiceover work, or if I'd like to, establish something that's cheery, friendly, welcoming, smile while you're recording, and you'd be surprised at how much you can hear your smile in the way that you deliver your line. So let's go ahead and listen back to what I've recorded here. Hey, I'm Tom, and this is Brain Vacancy Rent-Free, the show about whatever's distracting me this week. Not bad. Now, anytime I do this, I like to go ahead and get a couple of takes. If it's pre-recorded, then give yourself options. All right, so I've zoomed out a little bit so I can see a bit more of the recorded audio I've made. And I know that this area here is where I'm talking about myself recording. So I'm going to click, drag. I'm going to go ahead and delete that because I know we're not going to use it. Let's move on to our second take. Some coughs. Same there. Going to go ahead and, some voice clearing sounds. Go ahead and remove that as well. Hey, I'm Tom, and this is Brain Vacancy Rent-Free, the show about whatever's distracting me this week. Fine. Hey, I'm Tom, and this is Brain Vacancy Rent-Free, the show about whatever's distracting me this week. All right, so I like the second part of that particular take, and I think, hey, I'm Tom, and this is Brain Vacancy Rent-Free, and I like the first part of that take. So what I'm going to do is I know that the next phrase starts here. I'm not too wild about it. I don't feel too strongly about that second take. And because I've gotten very used to the way that my voice looks in a waveform, I can start to identify that this is the pattern of that first phrase, and this is where I start the second phrase. The show about whatever at any given time. Eventually, as you get more familiar with not only how to read a waveform, but how to read your voice, you'll get to this point as well. So I'm deleting the takes that I don't like, and let's see what happens when we try to combine the first part of the first take and the last part of the last take. Hey, I'm Tom, and this is Brain Vacancy Rent-Free, the show about whatever's distracting me this week. Cool. So I kind of like the sing-song nature that we're getting out of that introduction. And because I'm happy with it, I can just use that every time I start a new episode, and I'll never have to worry about editing this introduction again, ideally. All right, so let's see what that sounds like with our theme music. And here's our playback volume up here. I'm going to go ahead and lower that just because I know the music was pretty loud already as it was earlier. And this is not going to affect how your project comes out. This is just while you're listening and monitoring. Hey, I'm Tom, and this is Brain Vacancy. So right off the bat, our music is way too loud. My voice is being entirely overwhelmed. Now, this is where I use what's called the envelope tool. So when I click that, you'll notice that we get some borders that appear here. What I'm going to do with the envelope tool is I'm going to use it to lower the volume of one part of the music, and then I want it to fade up louder once I'm done delivering this first phrase. So it sounds like we've transitioned into that excitement. We're going to get amped for what comes next. And in order to do so, I'm going to select a particular point where I know that I want to start off at a particular volume. And you'll see, it might be very small. I'll go ahead and make it bigger here. Some dots appear. And what I can do is I can click on these, and it's going to change the volume of the entire track. But I want it to go from one volume to another where it gets higher. So I'm going to click again to create a second set of dots here. I'm going to click on the first ones. This is where my voice is going to be, so I'm going to make it very small so that the volume is going to be very low, but it'll still be present in the background. And what you're seeing here, this arc, is that's when it's going to fade up to a louder volume, which will hopefully give us a smooth transition from my beginning voiceover into the theme music. Hey, I'm Tom, and this is Brain Vacancy Rent-Free, the show about whatever's distracting me this week. Nice. Or at least I think so. I don't necessarily want to jam out to this music the whole time. I mean, I may want to, but I'll respect the possibility that maybe my audience doesn't. So I'm going to go ahead and select from here, and you notice I've zoomed back out. Sorry if I do anything a little bit too quickly, if I get into that bad habit, please feel free to stop me, sound off in chat if you have any questions along the way. In fact, while we are here, are there any questions? Is there anything that I can review or flesh out? I also do want to state that today's workshop is going to be recorded. So if you want to watch it at a later time, it will be going up on the FSU Library's YouTube soon after today. So I want my theme music to end before I get started talking about my podcast topic for the day. So I'm going to select from, this is a relatively arbitrary point, and delete the rest of the music track. And we'll zoom back in so that I can use the envelope tool one more time. I'm going to click at this point where I want it to maintain its current volume. And I'm going to click here at the end so that what I can do is I'm going to shrink this, if I can manage it, all the way down until it collapses in on itself. And what that hopefully should accomplish for us, maybe I'll move this here so it's a bit more gradual, is by the time it gets to that point, it will fade out and we'll have a relatively smooth transition into the actual body of the podcast. Hey, I'm Tom, and this is Brain Vacancy Rent-Free, the show about whatever's distracting me this week. Awesome. All right, so why don't I go ahead and record a bit of our audio podcast? Let's get some of the body of the content in here. Now, I just want to say that throughout this, these are the ways that I found that are effective for me. With Audacity and many other creative programs like it, there's 1,000 different ways to do things. So there's no right or wrong way. If you find something that works better for you, by all means, embrace it. I'm going to show you something I do a little bit differently for when I tend to record. Instead of just pressing record right off the bat, I like to press the pause button first and then hit the record button. What that does is you can see here that I'm able to monitor, or at least visualize, how loud my voice is. So if I'm going to be too soft, say in this region, or too loud, where it gets close to 0 decibels and you start to see the red rectangles pop up, you'll know that ahead of time before you start recording. I think that I can afford a little bit higher volume here, so I'm just going to raise it ever so slightly. And let's see, based off of my show notes, where'd those go? What was I going to talk about today? A tabletop RPG called Quest. As you can see, any amount of nerdy content, you should feel free and confident in being able to put out there in the world. Today, I'm going to be talking about the tabletop RPG Quest, and we'll just pretend that I went on a tirade all about it for about 30 minutes. But we'll pretend that now I'm going to conclude it. This has been my time with Quest, and what's been distracting me this week. So, of course, while you're recording in Audacity, you'll be able to, passively pay attention, make sure that the waveform is continuing to populate while you record and it hasn't stopped for any reason in the middle. Let's go ahead and listen back to what I've got here. Today I'm going to be talking about the tabletop RPG Quest, and we'll just pretend that I went on a tirade all about it for about 30 minutes. But we'll pretend that now I'm going to conclude it. This has been my time with Quest, and what's been distracting me this week. Alrighty, not too bad, but let's say that your vocals might be a little bit low, not quite as loud as you like. There's a couple ways that we can rectify this. So what I'm going to do is if I click on this part of the track here, kind of like the relatively open part of this square here, there's a couple of options that I have. One being this plus or minus dial here. This is your gain. And you can raise this or lower it, and that will raise the volume of the entire track. Hey, I'm Tom, and this is Brain Vacancy Rent-Free. While it's a little bit louder, you'll see the dreaded rectangles have popped up. If I were to export this as is, it would be distorted. So what I'm going to do, what I like to do, is go after selecting the part of the track or the entire track that I want to affect. I will go over to Effects, and I like to use Normalize. So what Normalize does is, based off of my option here, I can take whatever the loudest part of my audio is, that's the peak amplitude, and I will raise that up to -1 decibels. So when we were talking about clipping before, that's anything at or above 0 decibels. So -1 is a nice safe place to go ahead and raise everything up. Now pay attention to how this track looks here when I normalize it. You'll see that it's raised everything across the board, so it's going to be louder, but it's not going to be too loud. Hey, I'm Tom, and this is Brain Vacancy Rent-Free. I'm liking where that's going. I'll go ahead and do the same with my podcast body track here. So I'm clicking on the track here, going to Effect, Normalize, and now I've raised the levels across the board. Now there's a bit of just noise here. If I want to preview a particular part, say before I delete it, you can select it, and it'll just play back that part. So if you're about to delete something, but you really want to make sure that it's not something you want to keep, you can click and drag to select it, press spacebar. It's just going to play that part. So that's me beginning to speak, making a lovely mouth sound. Let's go ahead and delete that. This week. Today I'm going to be talking about the tabletop RPG Quest. All right. Not too shabby. I've zoomed out here. I'm going to go ahead and use these guys. And instead of just zooming out all the way, there's a couple of other options here with the magnifying glass. One is called Fit Project to Width. So when I click that, what it does is it automatically zooms out to a point where I can see everything that's on my timeline here. down to the last recorded section. So I'm going to record the conclusion to my show. So I'm going to go ahead and not quite minimize, but I'm going to ensmallen Audacity here in the corner. Let's go back to our podcast show notes. And I have a conclusion that, again, if I turn this into a template that I use for other episodes moving on, I'll always have my introduction that I can use time and time again, and I can just save a copy so that, whatever the body content ends up being, I can just replace that. Speaking of creating a template, something I should have done earlier is save this project. So I'm going to go over to File, and you should do this at the beginning. Don't be bad like me. And I'm going to hit Save Project. Save projects for an Audacity project. That's fine. And this is actually a good warning to keep in mind. So when you save your project, that's the Audacity project. It is not the audio file. So you can't just publish this as is. To create, we'll go over this at the end as well. Still important to note that when you're done with your project, you're going to export an audio file, say an MP3 or a WAV file. And that's what you'll use to publish, but it's also not the file you can use if you need to go back and make changes. We'll take a look at that soon. But let's go ahead and press OK. And as you can see, it went ahead and opened my handy dandy organized project folder. And I'm going to save this to my Audacity files, and we'll name it Brain Podcast. Okay. Let's go ahead and record our closing. So I want this recording to start after I've finished here so that it's already kind of naturally where I'd like it. I'll press pause and then record. So this way I can have a peek at how loud my voice is going to be. And I've used this bit of screen space so I can look at the script that I want to record at this point. So that'll be this section right here, followed by here. So I'm going to go ahead and highlight that for myself. We'll unpause. And now I'm live, I'm recording. All right, so one take. So that's what's been distracting me this week. Got your own recent obsessions? Send them my way. This show was produced, recorded, and edited by me, Tom Cruz. We're sponsored in part by FSU Libraries. Shout out to our executive producer, Jonathan Deso. And if you've got any questions or comments, feel free to email me at tjcruz@fsu.edu. And I press pause to stop recording. And that is true, by the way. If you have any questions for me that you don't think of during our presentation today, you can email me at tjcruz, that's C-R-U-Z, @fsu.edu. And while we are here, are there any other questions that I can answer? Thoughts, critique? I'll be looking out for them in chat if they do come up. But in the meantime, I'm going to select this. And just as we did earlier, I'm going to go ahead and normalize it even before I happen to record, or I happen to, preview it. And let's see how it turned out. We'll unpause. And now I'm live, I'm recording. All right, so one take. I definitely know that I don't want to keep that. All right, so I've zoomed in here so I can do a bit more detailed editing of just this track. We'll unpause, and now I'm live, I'm recording. All right, so one take. So that's what's been distracting. All right, we'll go ahead and delete that part. As you can see, if I delete anything in the beginning like that, again, dragging, selecting, hitting the delete key, it's going to go ahead and move all the audio over to where that part of the track began. So that's what's been distracting me this week. Got your own recent obsessions? Send them my way. This show was produced, recorded, and I'm going to assume that that all turned out great. And I know that my recording ends right here. So I'd love to reuse the beginning music bit as my outro music as well. It sure would be a lot of work to have to bring in the audio clip again and redo all of the envelope fade in, fade out work. So what I'm going to do instead, let's select this bit I'm going to hit Control C. So you should know that just the same as if you were doing, say, a Word document, you can use copy, you can use paste, and you can also do undo. So I'll show you how that works here. After I've copied, I've pasted, and I can hit Control Z. If you're on Mac, it's Command, and that undoes my paste. But I'll go ahead and copy that because I do want it there. This is my music track, so that's where I've decided to copy it. And this is where we'll use another very useful tool. It's called the time shift tool. It sounds way more sci-fi and complicated than it really is. Basically, what this allows you to do, we have our audio tracks, but you can see here we've got a line at the beginning and end of this audio sample that is a clip. So with time shift, I can take an individual clip and move it around like so. So I want to overlap it similarly to the way that I did before. I'm going to switch to my selection tool. So I have a bit of a frame of reference here as to where my voice ends and where I want the louder music to begin. And I want it to overlap my voice ever so slightly. So we've got a bit of that momentum toward the ending music. So I'm just going to eyeball this here. I think that's about where I'd like it. And let's listen back and see how this turns out. Tom Cruz. We're sponsored in part by FSU Libraries. Shout out to our executive producer, Jonathan Deso. And if you've got any questions or comments, feel free to email me at tjcruz@fsu.edu. I think it's not too bad. And, hopefully that's helped demonstrate so far what it's like to go from recording your podcast all the way to doing, some necessary editing, maybe doing some extra takes, and including other audio sources like music as well. Now we're at a point where we can export our project because we're happy with where it's at. So I'm going to go ahead and make Audacity big again for us. Let's go ahead and use the Fit Project to Width button here so we can look at the entirety of our work. And before you go ahead and export, I'm using my Skip to Start button here. Hey, listen back to the whole thing. Make sure that there's nothing that you want to go back in and edit. I'll pretend that we've already done that. And again, not subject you to the entirety of what we've recorded so far. So to export, I'm going to go to File, Export, and you got a couple of options here. I tend not to touch these too much. Typically, my choices are between export as MP3, so that's going to be a smaller file, and there's export as WAV, which is a very high quality, but also a huge file size. For our purposes today, MP3 is going to be fine. So based off of my handy dandy project folder here, I'm going to put this into my exports folder. We've got Brain Podcast as the name, and I'm going to add a draft here. I might want to share it with others. And usually this is good enough before you hit save, but you do have format options. So if you want to change the quality, typically between standard, extreme, and insane here, which is, very, very strong language, you're going to be good. This is perfectly listenable. We'll go ahead with insane, and I'll go ahead and save this. Now, your tracks will be mixed down and exported as one stereo file. What that means is that everything that we see here is going to be mixed down to something that looks like this first music track here. You have the ability to edit what's called metadata. So if you've ever looked at the details of, say, a music file on your computer, it will populate all of these different little bits. So right now it's showing the artist name for the royalty-free music that I put into my podcast. I'm going to go ahead and hit clear. If you want to put in your information here, you're more than welcome, but it's not absolutely required. Alrighty, so little bar popped up and it disappeared just as fast. But if we check out our project folder, we go to our exports, our Brain Podcast draft has appeared. Hey, I'm Tom, and this is Brain Vacancy Rent-Free. I would listen to that one more time just to make sure that there's nothing, no goofs or anything that you might want to edit. And let's say that you do find some kind of an error. So what I'm going to do is we'll pretend that we haven't looked at our project file in a while, this being our project file. I'm going to close Audacity and open it up again. And oh no, I've noticed a mistake. Maybe the music is too loud at one point. So let's see what happens when we bring in our exported audio file. So this is not the project file. This is the one that we shot out as an MP3 into Audacity. It's all edited together. So just like it said, it's brought everything into just this stereo track. And if I were to play it back, hey, I'm Tom, and this is Brain Vacancy Rent-Free. As you can see, both the music and my voice now exist in the same track, so I won't be able to say lower the music by itself without affecting my voice at the same time. So that's why it's important to be sure to retain the distinction between what you export and the project file, which you should keep around if you plan on making changes in the future. Now, I showed off earlier, and I don't mind showing off again. I won't go ahead and I won't save that project. What my recording studio was for not this particular recording, but instead a sample that I'm going to show you momentarily. And here it is. This is just to demonstrate that you can use literally what is at your disposal. In my case, I put my phone between some clothes in my closet, which provided me with just enough of a sound dampened area. I recorded using just the voice memo app on my phone, and then I brought it to my computer into Audacity to edit. And allow me to show you what the result of that was. So we'll go over to I'm Tom, and this is Vacancy Rent. Show about whatever's distracting me this week. So back in the day, I was part of a Dungeons and Dragons campaign. A friend of ours was the dungeon master, as they call it, and it was a ton of fun. I went on to just put my phone in my closet, and I just babbled for about 15 minutes straight. And I basically recorded a tiny podcast episode. And, really, that's all it needs to be. You don't need to worry about being absolutely perfect. If you're a fan of Radiolab, my goodness, do not try to reach the heights of what's done, because podcasts like that typically have multi-person projects. But I want you to feel empowered as an individual to be able to go ahead and create and just start the practice, and eventually ways to make it easier, ways to make it better will come to you naturally. So we've talked about downloading, installing. We've covered everything we were going to cover. Downloading and installing is there twice. I did want to touch on publishing real quick, just in case you head to that part of your journey. Again, we talked about using your planning document to get your concept down. I just went ahead and included the first Googleable link I could, that gives you a nice long list of different podcast platforms that you can upload to. Some of them allow you to publish on multiple platforms at once. One that I found very recently, I have yet to experiment with myself, that's very interesting, is called Anchor. This one's from Spotify. And from my understanding, it's absolutely free. And you can even record directly onto your phone and then distribute from there. But if you want to bring it into Audacity first and you export an audio file, you can import into Anchor, which is available on iOS or Android for your smartphone, and then you can publish from there. So a very interesting option. I'll be doing a little bit more exploration myself, but of course, when it comes to these, feel free to do your own research, read up, see what's going to be best for you. That's it. We've covered everything from planning your project to opening Audacity, exploring a bit, recording your podcast, doing some edits, and ultimately exporting a completed project.